And a quick thank you for you all. I'll go ahead and pass it over to you, Miranda, and looking forward to your presentation.
Awesome, thank you, Kate. Go ahead and share. All right, so again, welcome to Hack the Stack using custom resources in AWS CloudFormation. So to get started here, just want to go over some of the goals and what I hope the outcomes will be of this talk. So I'm hoping that by the end of it, you'll know what a custom resource is, how to use it, and some of the different examples of how custom resources can help simplify your cloud deployments. In order to do that, we're going to do a quick introduction, and then we'll go over the CloudFormation overview just to make sure we all have a good baseline. We'll talk about what a custom resource is. I have a demo for you where we're going to build a custom resource and then use it from a CloudFormation template. We'll briefly go over when it's not a good idea to use custom resources, and then some examples of custom resources in action. And we'll have some time for Q&A at the end, but again, feel free to use the chat. Just make sure you switch it so that everyone can see your feedback. So without further ado, a little bit about Liberty Mutual Insurance. So we're a really big company. We are over 100 years old. But what's really exciting is that we're also a very big technology company. So we have over 5,000 technology employees, which is bigger than some technical companies are in their entirety. And I'm really excited to share that for the second year in a row, we've been voted one of the top 100 best places to work in IT based on the best places to work survey results. And we're number 28 among the large companies. We're also one of the best employers for women. And as far as women in IT, I think that has a lot to do with our Women in Tech organization, which I'm a proud member of. I am part of the LEGIT subcommittee. So LEGIT is Liberty Encouraging Girls in Technology. And our mission is similar to Women in Code, but it's more about inspiring young girls to pursue STEM disciplines. So through that opportunity, I've had the ability to go into schools and bring the Hour of Code program, as well as doing after-school coding programs and some programs with Girls Who Code. I've also been a WIT Summit mentor. So this is for students in college, in their early years of college, where we have a summit where they can learn about professional development and then have mentorship throughout the fall semester, going into potential internships the next year. So if you have any questions about working at Liberty Mutual Technology, you can go to our website. We have plenty of opportunities, all available remote as well. So see the website for some more information. And as for me, my name's Miranda LeBlanc. I'm a solutions engineer in the Secure DevOps Platforms department. Our department is responsible for helping engineers with all the tools that they need in order to build and run their applications, their services, and everything amongst our cloud runtimes. I reside in Boise, Idaho. I'm logging in from there. It's about dinner time here. And while I'm at work, I really believe that in order to have fully empowered engineers, we need a really good developer experience plus education. So for about 4 years, I focused on the engineering experience side. I was a developer. I moved from a lead developer role into a product owner role and into a management role. And it was while I was in that management role that I decided to move to our customer success team. And that's where I really started focusing on education. And in education, what I'm trying to do is help bring immersive education opportunities within Liberty Mutual. So for example, our new hire curriculum and our internal hackathons. So this falls right in line with, my passion about just sharing knowledge across the community. So if you want to get in touch with me, I put my Twitter handle on there, and I'm also available on LinkedIn. All right, so let's set the stage with CloudFormation. So in AWS, CloudFormation has 3 main parts. So first is the CloudFormation template. And that's where you use a declarative approach to describe your resources using code. Then you pass that template to the AWS CloudFormation service, and the service is responsible for building resources, making updates to resources, or potentially deleting resources. So the CloudFormation service does all those CRUD operations. And then all of those resources that are provisioned as part of the CloudFormation template from that one template, they become a stack. And then those resources can be managed together. So it helps simplify your deploy process because it's all repeatable and using configuration as code. When you get into the structure of a CloudFormation template, it supports both YAML and JSON. Like we said, it's declarative by nature. So what you write is how you want your resources to look after the template has been processed. And then AWS CloudFormation Services determines all of the pieces and parts necessary to get your resources into that state. And AWS CloudFormation is extremely powerful. There's a lot that you can do with it. So let's look at an example. So this is an example from the CloudFormation documentation. In this example, we have three main sections. So we have the format version, a description, and your resources. And in your resources, in this example, it's creating an EC2 instance. We know that because of the type is showing that is an AWS EC2 instance. And it's based off of an AMI, an image ID. Note that in this example, the AMI is hard-coded. So the CloudFormation template can have quite a bit built up into its anatomy. So we saw in the past example, it only had a format, a description, and resources, but you could also put metadata, parameters, you can have outputs that feed into other templates, you can have special rules and mappings, conditions, and even transformations. So a lot of what you're trying to provision in AWS can be done all through CloudFormation. But where do custom resources come into play? Custom resources enable you to write custom provisioning logic in templates that AWS CloudFormation runs anytime you create, update, only if you change the custom resource, or delete the stacks. So the custom resources really allow you to extend that AWS functionality provided by CloudFormation. There are two different ways to extend this functionality. You can extend it inside of AWS, and then you can even go beyond AWS. So why would you extend the current CloudFormation template within AWS? So first, not all AWS resources are supported by CloudFormation. So sometimes you might have to write a custom resource in order to do those CRUD operations for AWS resources. And it is important to make sure that you go back and periodically check if that support has been added. Also, another example is some resources don't support tagging through CloudFormation templates. So that's another area where you might write a custom resource to do that tagging. Also within AWS, you can dynamically look up other AWS resources. So in the example that we saw earlier, where there was an EC2 being spun up and the AMI, the image ID was hard-coded, that's where you could use a custom resource to dynamically look up the latest AMI image based on your requirements. If you're extending outside of AWS, one thing you could do is manage third-party resources. So say you're deploying a new web page and you want certain monitoring to track, how much traffic you're getting, or maybe you have like a feedback survey that you need to register. You could make those calls to those third-party services using a custom resource. You can also support integrations with external systems. So external to AWS might mean internal to your on-prem cloud solution. So for example, you might be registering a secret with your secrets management solution if you have that stored in like a multi-cloud approach. A custom resource is made up of three major components. So the first is the resource provider. And this is where you're defining that functionality. What happens when you do a create, an update, or a delete? This provider can be invoked either via a Lambda function, or it can be invoked using the simple notification service on a topic. So Lambda is great for small one-off use cases, but if you're planning on deploying out like a whole suite of custom resources, I'd recommend using the SNS implementation because that will make it a more standard approach and make it easier for the engineers across your organization. The second main component is the CloudFormation template developer. So this is the person who's creating a resource and referencing your custom provider. And they're going to reference your custom resource through the service token. So that's either going to be the SNS topic, or it's going to be your Lambda. And then the CloudFormation service is where it performs those functions to take what's in your CloudFormation template and go and call the custom resource and return the results back as it's creating your stack or doing the updates. Because all of this is supported by AWS CloudFormation, you can also use custom resources in CDK deployments, and they have an entire library supporting custom resources. So let's see a demo of building a simple Lambda-based custom resource. So first, we're going to create our Lambda custom resource, which will be a sum. So it's going to add two numbers together. And then once we have that custom resource, we're going to define a template and reference it. Then we'll create a stack from the template. We'll validate that the stack has been created, and then we'll see what happens when we have bad input from the stack. And I chose the example below because it has a really, I think, a really intuitive Python library for creating custom resources. So let's see it in action. So again, we're doing the CloudFormation custom resource creation with Python, Lambda, and the CR helper. So first things first, we'll create our custom resource. So I need to create the directory where I'm going to work. And then I need to make sure that I install the Python libraries. So now I have all my dependencies ready. Let's go ahead and create the file where we're going to put our Lambda code. And again, that's a Python file. And now we can open our favorite code editor. For me, that's VS Code when I'm working with Python. So I can open up the Python file and then copy and paste the example code into the file. So in this example code, first we're importing our dependencies and creating an instance of the helper. Those annotations show when we're going to be, what function to call when we're doing either a create or an update for CloudFormation. We're going to create the sum of two numbers based on the inputs. And we get those inputs from the resource properties in the template. So we have number 1 and number 2. And then we're going to store the result, that sum, in our data and call it sum. We don't have any state to manage, so our delete operation really doesn't do anything. And then we define our handler to let the Lambda know how to, interact with our code. And I did change the name of it from the example just to help simplify things a bit. So the next step of the tutorial is to zip up the Lambda and go ahead and create a Lambda. In the example, it says to use the CLI. I wanted to use the AWS console just to show you another way of doing the same functionality. So we'll go into the Lambda in the AWS console in that service. And we're looking for the button to create the function. There it is. And now we can go in and we're going to give our function a name. So we'll just use the same as the example, CR helper some resource. And we'll have to change the runtime. Then we'll go ahead and create the function. This does take a minute, but that's because it's uploading all of our code. Or it's creating the Lambda that we can then upload our code to. So we have our zip file ready to go. Now that we uploaded it, we can see our custom code appear. But we still have a few more things that we need to configure. So we'll need to increase the default timeout from 3 seconds to 9 seconds. And we can go and do that in the configuration tab. There we go. We'll save it. And we're ready to go. So now it's time to use the custom resource, define it, and use it in a template. Let's go back to our editor. We'll create the file for the template. And our example uses YAML. We'll copy it in. So there's our custom resource. And we need to point this at our Lambda. So we're going to go back, grab our ARN, pop it into our template. To make sure we don't have any funny business, let's change one of the numbers. And we're all set. We can now go ahead and use that template to create our CloudFormation stack. So go into the stacks, create a stack. We have our template ready. We can go ahead and upload it. And then we can specify our details. So we're just going to give it a name. Want to be descriptive here. And we don't need to change any settings. We can accept all the defaults. And then we'll go ahead and create the stack. So at this point, we can see that the create has started. And it's creating that stack based off of our template. And the create is complete. So let's look at what happened. So we can see in the events that it started creating our stack, creating our custom resource, and it finished creating our custom resource and then finished creating the stack. And to double check, let's look at our outputs because we should see that sum. And we can see it did add those two numbers correctly, and we have the sum of 5. So what happens if we put in something that's not a number? Let's try a string. So now we're going to create a new stack because we have a new template. This way we can look at them side by side. And we'll give a good name for the stack. Again, we're going to accept all the defaults. And we're creating the stack. Creating the custom resource, and it failed. And notice we got a nice failure message, and that's because we're using that CR helper library. So now that we're done, we're going to do some cleanup. So after experimenting out in AWS, it's a good idea to clean up your resources so you don't accidentally get charged for resources that you're not using. So we've cleaned up our stacks. And let's remember to go back and clean up the Lambda. There we go. And we're good to go. So that example showed creating the custom resource defined by Lambda and then accessing it within a template. So when is it not a good idea to use custom resources? So if AWS already supports the resource that you're working with, don't recreate the wheel. So when you can have the native support, you always want to use that first. It also means going back and checking if there are custom resources that you've written in the past, and now AWS has added that support. You want to go back and clean that up because that could build in potential tech debt. You also want to check the CloudFormation registry. So this is an area where AWS, along with a lot of third-party providers, can upload resources and modules that you can use within your templates. So definitely check there first. There are a lot of third parties who have already updated things, like, for example, GitHub and MongoDB. So just, it's worth a look there. The search functionality is a little bit tricky, so I had to browse through a couple times to find what I was looking for. You also want to be mindful of long-running operations. So CloudFormation by default has a timeout of 60 minutes. And if you have operations that are running longer than that, it might be better to find a different way to incorporate that functionality. Also, if you have stateful resources, if they can't handle those CRUD operations, that's going to make creating the custom resource pretty tricky. So just something to keep in mind. So let's talk through a few examples of custom resources in action. So we alluded to this one earlier in the presentation, but this example is one of the examples from the CloudFormation documentation. And it's dynamically looking up that image ID when you're creating an EC2 resource. So as you're going through this walkthrough, the first thing you're going to do is create the CloudFormation stack, or you're going to create the custom resource. So that custom resource is the Lambda. So you're going to upload that Lambda code to an S3 bucket. And then you're going to go through and define the custom resource. So that defines both the Lambda function and the IAM role, and it also gives the Lambda access to call the EC2 describe images API. So that function needs to be able to hit that API in order to get that image ID. Then the custom resource, the AMI info, references that Lambda function. And it takes certain inputs, so that's defined in the resource properties, and that's where you'll need to send the region that you're in, as well as what instance type you're looking for Linux-based images or the Windows version. So you can go through and do that walkthrough. There's also a really nice lesson out in a Cloud Guru that goes through that walkthrough as well. Another example is you can extend upon dynamically looking up that information. So you could look up things like security groups. Say you have multiple security groups or a shared security group that you want to use for your resources. You could have a custom resource that does that lookup for you. Or if you're using a multi-account approach, you could use a resource to look up account-specific information for where you're trying to deploy your stack. There also might be an example where you have an enterprise networking team that controls the design of your network and controls provisioning things like VPCs and subnets. And then you would need to dynamically look up those VPCs and subnets to make sure that you're deploying into the right location. We've also used a custom resource for generating random strings. This can be especially helpful if you need a unique string to represent something like a password. So say you're creating a database and you need a password for an ID to access that database. You could use the random string generator and then have that password created at runtime as the deployment's happening. or as you're rotating IDs. Where are we going to put those passwords? This is where you might need an external integration. So if you're not using an AWS native service to manage your secrets, you might need to use a custom resource to access whatever your secrets management solution is to make sure that you can do those creates and updates and deletes. You also might need to reach out to external systems to store metadata about your stack and about what you're deploying. You could also use a custom resource to set up a schedule for your EC2 instances or maybe your RDS instances. You might have something, that does some automatic shutdowns to try to help save some money. So before I go today, I just want to do a huge shout out and thank you to Allie Maxwell, Alyssa Porter, and Christy Peralt. They're all amazing women within my department on my team. And without them, I wouldn't have been able to do this today. Do we have any questions? I'll go ahead and check the chat. It looks like we have a couple. Go ahead and stop the share. And thank you to all the familiar names out there. I really appreciate the support. And thank you, Women Who Code, for the opportunity. Really happy to be here.
Looks like we just got a question in chat from Lauren. Mentions, what has been your biggest win in your career to date?
Oh, that is an interesting question. I would say the opportunity to try out different roles. So getting to try out going from an engineer to a product manager, and then to a manager, and then back to the engineering track. I think that is a really interesting opportunity, and it's something that is potentially harder to do at smaller organizations. So I've really appreciated all the opportunities provided to me. It looks like we have another question. So if I understand correctly, the idea of a custom resource is to run some code with a Lambda to do a small operation on your resources. Is that correct? So it could be to do anything that falls within the boundaries of something you'd want to do on a create operation, on an update, or on a delete. So all sorts of different examples. So you could, be, like we said, reaching out to those APIs to have better tracking on your websites, storing a secret if you created a secret during your deployment, you could then store it. So all sorts of different examples. It's kind of the floor is yours as far as what you want to do with it. If people want to add in their examples, that would be really good too. And then I see the question about how the SNS topic is used instead. So there's a whole in-depth section in CloudFormation documentation on how to use SNS topics, but essentially the CloudFormation puts the event out onto the topic, and then you need to write something that's going to consume that event with the appropriate responses back. And that's how, and then CloudFormation service is aware of those events and able to incorporate it back into your, like the outputs back in. And yes, Sunitha, it's the same custom resource for create, update, and delete. Although if you're doing the SNS, you might be able to have different portions grabbing the different events or listening for the different events.
Okay, thank you, chat, for the questions. Please keep them pouring in. We really like having them. Thank you. Awesome, Miranda.
Thank you.
I guess I do have a question of my own. What
Sure.
has been some of the more challenging custom resources you've had to build?
Oof. So I technically haven't built a custom resource before. I've mostly consumed them. So we have a team that's dedicated to really providing a good experience using AWS. So that's a team of about, I think they're about 6 developers or 6 engineers. And they manage writing our custom resources, but they did make the framework extendable. So if I had one that, I really was interested in creating, I would be able to create that and submit a pull request back to that team and work with them and get their feedback. And they're within the same department. So it would be, really easy to just get that communication going and the collaboration. And the team that I'm on, we're called Customer Success. And what we do is we support all of the different products for our department. So sometimes if we see an example of our customers who really need something, we'll work with the team. And if it's not, something that the team can create right away, we tend to submit pull requests back to those teams as well. So it's a really cool area to be in where you're both supporting and working directly with our customers, but then also like getting to implement and make changes on our own too.
Yes, that is. We actually had a comment. Someone said that's awesome. I like that you can do pull requests on the team stuff. Oh, thank you, Sunita. Yeah.
Definitely a really good inner source model.
We'll be here for a little bit longer in case anyone has any other questions. We'll put some links in the chat so that way everyone can have an eye out for future events coming up. And also to keep in touch with us. We have a Slack channel and we look forward to talking with everyone. And then we had another question come in. Would you recommend Cloud Guru for education over other resources?
Yeah, so for my learning style, I love to get in and experiment and do hands-on learning. And I've appreciated a Cloud Guru, and they have a sandbox environment. So you can go in and experiment and test and try things out right along with the lessons. So I've really appreciated that. Again, I haven't tried every learning opportunity out there. I do Pluralsight quite a bit too, and I believe they've got some sandboxes as well that you can use, or some lab environments. But those would be my top 2, especially if it's AWS. I've really found a Cloud Guru valuable.
Thank you. Thank you for your question also, everyone. We have another one coming in. So it says, curious how you generally run the CloudFormation templates. Do you use the AWS console to do this, or do you use some tools like Jenkins with pipelines or something else?
Yeah, so I would always recommend a pipeline unless you're going in there and doing experimentation. So for example, the experiments that I did during the demo, I did that using the console just to show a different approach. But if you're trying to do something and you want your teammates to be able to learn from it, there are so many benefits to using pipelines. The tool that I use the most is the Atlassian Bamboo tool. But there are plenty of pipelines out there that have AWS integrations, and AWS has their own CI/CD tool as well. So highly recommended to use pipelines to make it repeatable and easier for your team to maintain.
And for maintenance, what are some best practices that you've used for building safety?
Sorry, what was that?
What are some best practices you might recommend for maintaining or maintenance?
Maintenance? Yeah, so I would say deploy often. So you want to be, double checking, make sure that once you've provisioned something, you know how to go back and do maintenance on it right away before it becomes too complex. So for example, if you've created a database out there, make sure you know how to do like a recovery before you get too far down the road. But yeah, definitely make sure you're keeping your templates up to date and running them fairly quickly or fairly often to get some of those security updates. Keep them fresh.
Then we have another question here. So it says, so with using Bamboo, do you use that to also do maintenance type tasks? Like if things need updating or reconfiguring? Do you have a separate pipeline for these?
Yeah, so I would use the same pipeline, but yes, I would have everything go through a pipeline. Like if you're out in a sandbox environment, maybe provision things, you could, test things out in the console or try doing tweaks by hand in the console. But then as soon as you're, getting ready to move beyond like that experimentation environment, that's where I would do everything through the pipeline because it takes that human error piece out of the equation.
Nice, thank you. Okay. Thank you, everyone. This has been really nice. Miranda, we really appreciate you coming out.
No, thank you for the opportunity, and definitely happy to take questions on either Twitter or feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. Oh, good question. Is there a website where we can check out opportunities at Liberty Mutual? Pop that in. I don't think it linked, but if you copy and paste that into your browser, you can go to lmi.co/tech. And that goes over all sorts of information about technology within Liberty and our open opportunities.
Okay. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate this. We're going to go ahead and wrap up now. We're getting close to time. If you have any last questions or anything, please ask them. If not, thank you so much for coming out. We really appreciate it. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Hey, Gracia, since you started the meeting, you'll have to shut it off. While you click on leave meeting, you should do leave for all.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.